Hello, everyone. I just want to say welcome on behalf of the GSC and KPA. We want to welcome you and thank you for being here. A couple of reminders. If you are here and you're pursuing the professional development certificate, I'm going to ask you to make sure that you checked in. And if you haven't, please go outside for a minute and we can check you in so you can get credit. The workshop is going to have actually 2 points toward 2 attendance points. So at the middle of the workshop, you're actually going to be asked to check in again. Please keep that in mind. And I just want to let you know that we're going to have our next workshop March 6th. It's going to be right here from 2:30 till 3:30, and we're going to talk about oral presentations. And with that, I hope you learn a lot, and thank you for being here. I'm going to let Amy take it away.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Brusk, and I'm a grant specialist in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And so K-State has grant specialists in both the main campus office, and then there's a few of us that are within the colleges. And so I am within the college, and I've been with K-State for about 15 years, and I've been handling grants for 11 or 12 years. And so I work with the faculty there, and I handle the grants both from pre and post award. So I help them with their funding literally from cradle to grave. So today I'm going to talk about just a brief infrastructure, research support offices, how that's set up. Now I'm going to talk to you today about the K-State setup, but just bear in mind that as future faculty members at other institutions, they'll probably have a similar setup. We're going to go over the life cycle of a grant, so from proposal to award closeout. And so that's going to entail, how do you find funding opportunities? How do you put the proposal together? Once you've got an award, now what do you do? Managing that award through the life of the award, and then closing it out. Okay, so this is just a listing of the research support offices that we have available to us here at K-State. So the big umbrella is the Office of the Vice President for Research. And underneath there is where research and sponsor programs did. Pre-awards services is the main hub that all proposals submitted from K-State go through. And then we've got the Research Compliance Office, which is where IACUC for vertebrate animals and your IBC for biohazards, that's where all that's housed. And then the Division of Financial Services has a sponsored programs accounting office. And so that's on the post-award side. That's the ones that they manage the accounting side of your grant awards once the grant is received. And then there's a few of us at K-State that have college and departmental research administration offices, and where I'm from, veterinary medicine is one of those that has that. Okay, so the first thing that you've got to do is find your funding. We have a couple different resources to look for funding. So the K-State has a really good research webpage that has several resources on there on how you can find funding opportunities. A couple of terms that you're going to see when you're looking at those, there's a whole list up here. The ones that are most frequently used are probably FOA and RFP. So FOA stands for Funding Opportunity Announcement. RFP is a request for proposals. So each of these varies a little bit, but essentially they're just all different ways of sponsors have money that they want to put towards a certain area, a certain program. And so these are different ways of asking for applications and ideas on how to use those funds. A couple of other options, K-State puts out a really nice research weekly newsletter. And I believe to get on that listserv, you can just email pre-awards, or if you've ever submitted a grant proposal before, I think you're automatically put on that listserv. But that's a really nice newsletter that comes out with funding opportunity highlights and different issues that can come up with research. The Pivot Funding Opportunities database, I'm going to show you what that looks like here in a minute, but that is a really nice database that K-State pays a subscription to. So you do have to be on campus to use it, I believe, but it's a all-encompassing database. So it searches for all kinds of funding, nonprofits, international, I believe maybe some federal, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. Grants.gov is the main hub of searching for federal funding opportunities. And so I'll show you what that looks like as well. And then K-State also has some internal grant programs that I'm sure you've seen go out. So, you know, we have funding that we do put out a call for proposals for, you know, pilot programs and faculty travel awards and things like that. And then over at the College of Veterinary Medicine, we do have several grants that we receive from industry sponsors. And a lot of those connections are literally built just through networking. And so once you have a connection with an industry sponsor, they may come to you or you go to them about a project or an idea. And, you know, from that comes a grant project. Another way is literally just contacting your grant specialist, contacting pre-awards or the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, telling them I have this idea, I'm looking for funding for this area, point me in the right direction. So this is what Pivot looks like. And you can get to the Pivot website from the K-State Research webpage. And so it's really nice because at the top you can search by keyword. And then once you plug in a couple of keywords, depending on how narrow and broad those terms are, it'll pull up these nice results. And so it'll list some funding opportunities, when they're due, or if the deadline has passed, it'll have maybe an anticipated next due date. And the nice thing about Pivot is that you can create searches and then save them. And so this is a really handy tool, and I'm assuming that other universities probably use Pivot or some other subscription database service, but it's definitely something to take advantage of. This is what grants.gov looks like. So this is the federal hub for looking for funding opportunities. It's not the most user-friendly website, but you are able to search by keyword. You just have to be careful because when you plug in a keyword, it's gonna pull up funding opportunities from all kinds of federal agencies that may or may not fit within your area. So you just kind of have to read those carefully and make sure it's the right one. Okay, so once you've found a funding opportunity that you want to apply for, then you need to start putting together your proposal. So a couple of terms that you're going to see or hear are PI or PD. A PI is a principal investigator, a PD is a project director, a co-I is a co-investigator. So you'll probably hear those thrown out there as you're putting together your proposal. One of the most important things to remember when you're putting your proposal together is that all grant proposals need to be reviewed by K-State first before they're submitted. They have to be reviewed and approved, and that's done through the pre-awards office. Now, in my college, because I'm a departmental grant specialist, I'm the liaison to pre-awards office. And so they come to me and work through me, but ultimately everything is funneled through pre-awards. The first thing that you need to get done when you decide I'm going to apply for this funding opportunity, your very first thing that you need to work on is your budget. And I know sometimes that can be difficult to put together before you know what you're doing for the project. So if you need to write down a brief outline or skeleton of this is how the project is going to go so that you know what cost to put in your budget, do that. But you don't need to have the entire proposal written and then do the budget. The budget really needs to be done first. And that reason is because K-State needs to review and approve that budget before it's submitted to make sure that all the costs are in there, to make sure that there isn't anything that shouldn't be in there. And so I always ask faculty to please get the budget done first. And you can work side by side with your grant specialist to put that budget together. There's going to be another presentation later that's going to go over the budget in more detail and how to build that. But the main two parts of a budget are direct costs and indirect costs. And indirect costs are that percent overhead, or it's also called F&A, that is added on to the direct costs. Your direct costs are your salary, your supplies, your travel, the literal costs that you put in your budget. And then your budget justification is basically a written story or a written narrative of here's my costs in the project and this is why each one is needed. But again, there's another presentation later that's going to go through that in more detail. So, all right, so like I said before, all proposals do need to be reviewed and approved by K-State before they're submitted. And so the person who does that is called an AOR, or an authorized organizational representative, or sometimes you'll also hear your institutional representative. And for us, that person is Paul Lowe. He's our Associate Vice President of Research. And so he literally signs off on all proposals and all grant agreements that come in through their office. There's probably other institutions that have more than one, and we've got some backups for Paul, but he is our AOR or institutional representative. So as you're putting your proposal package together, this is a list of typical documents that are in a proposal package. The sponsor of the grant is going to have some guidelines and some instructions on what needs to be in there and how it needs to be put together. And I know sometimes this list can seem overwhelming, especially if you do a federal grant proposal, because their guidelines are several pages long. As a departmental grant specialist, what I tell my faculty is, I try to shoulder as much of the administrative burden as I can so that they can focus on writing the proposal. And so we can really help you comb through those guidelines and tell you, okay, here's the documents that you need, here's how they need to be formatted, and what needs to be included. I'm not going to go through this list extensively, but basically the probably most two important parts are the project summary or abstract, which is a paragraph about your project. It's just a short summary, and different sponsors will limit the length of that. Some sponsors limit it by the number of lines, some limit it by the number of words. All of that will be in the guidelines or the instructions. And then the project narrative is your big chunk, like your full written grant proposal as to how that project is going to go. And the others down here are just other documents that could or could not be included. It all depends on those guidelines. So that's a pretty important document to read. But again, you have a grant specialist who will help you through those guidelines. These are a couple of other documents that may or may not need to be included. We have some federal sponsors that require a vertebrate animals document where we have to justify why do animals need to be included, how did you decide on the number that need to be included. All of those instructions and what they want will be in the guidelines. And a lot of times we include letters of support. So that can be from either an industry contact or another faculty member, basically telling the sponsor, this project is needed, this is a really good idea, we think that you should fund it, etc. And so, as I said, whether or not these documents need to be included will be in the funding opportunity guidelines. All right, so you've got your proposal together, and now you need to submit it. So K-State uses a software called Cayuse, and Cayuse does two jobs for us. Because all proposals do have to be reviewed and approved by K-State, they have to be routed around. So they have to be seen and signed off on by all the investigators involved in the project, by their department heads, and by their deans. And we route that all around to everyone through an electronic system. And that is one of the jobs that Cayuse does for us. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a little bit. The other job that Cayuse does for us is to submit our federal grant proposals through the federal website. So Cayuse allows us to have the software is an interface to that federal website. And so we plug everything into Cayuse. That's where we upload everything. And then it's able to talk to grants.gov and submit that grant proposal for us. The reason that we use Cayuse, there's a lot of checks in there. So it'll give us warnings and errors if we're missing anything. And so it comes in really handy. FastLane, that probably doesn't need to be in that list anymore. That's a system that National Science Foundation used to use. And then several non-federal sponsors, nonprofits, they may have their own online system, and that's okay. We just go in and submit it through their website. So a lot of that depends on the sponsor. And that's something that your grant specialist and pre-awards will help you do. So as I said, Cayuse does two jobs for us. So this is kind of what it looks like when you log in through your K-State EID. And on the bottom there, you see Cayuse SP and Cayuse 424. So SP is the part of Cayuse that routes it around to all the investigators and the department heads and the deans. And then Cayuse 424 is the second job. That is the part of Cayuse that talks to grants.gov and submits proposals through the federal website. So when you log into Cayuse, This is what it would look like. This is a screenshot. So if you are a part of a proposal or you've put one together and you're getting ready to submit it, and it is routed to you for certification, you would get an email with a link and you log in with your K-State EID. And then you would go to, on the left, kind of small letters, I don't know if you can see it, says PI certification inbox. And so you would click on that and it would take you to your list of grant proposals or your proposal that needs to be certified. Now, please know that when you are certifying a proposal, you are saying that you agree to abide by the sponsor policies as well as K-State policies. And so by clicking, there's a little box that you click that says, that you approve, you're agreeing to abide by all of those policies. And so that goes around to each investigator and then their department head and then their dean. And then once all that is done, K-State has completed their review of the budget, then we submit the proposal. This is just a screenshot of what a federal proposal looks like in the Caillou software system. Now, most of my faculty don't want to get in here. And so that's something that I do. Basically, they send me the documents, they send me the project summary and the narrative, the facilities, each of those documents, and then I have a field in the application that I upload into here. So this is probably not something that you will need to worry about, but I just want to give you an idea of what a federal grant proposal application looks like. So we love PIs who submit early. I always tell my faculty that we can offer you the best level of customer service the earliest that you get things to us. And so I always recommend that, excuse me, as soon as you know you want to apply for a funding opportunity, let your grant specialist know so we can get on our calendar, we can follow up with you if needed to make sure that you're getting things done in time. But the earlier you can get us documents to review and make sure that everything's in there, the best level of customer service that we can provide you to make sure that the proposal is at its best. For our federal proposals, there's a lot of popular funding opportunities that many institutions are going to be submitting at the same time. So when there's a deadline for a federal grant, it's one deadline for everyone. And so their online system, grants.gov, can get jammed because we have so many applications all over being submitted. And so we prefer to submit federal grant proposals the day before. So we do ask that you keep that in mind, plan ahead, plan to have it done early. We have had applications kicked back because we tried to submit them at 4:59 when it was due at 5 p.m. and it didn't quite make it all the way through the system. So just make sure that you plan ahead. All right, so you've got your proposal put together and congrats, you found out you have funding. You received a notice of award. So a couple of different terms to know. There is a grant and a contract. So those are a little different. A grant is an award from a funding source which provides financial assistance to complete a project. A contract is a mechanism for procurement. So a grant is going to be more your federal funding opportunities and even some of your nonprofit. A contract is more the mechanism that we use for our industry sponsors. So an industry sponsor will come to you and say, we want to test this product or test this method, work up a budget, how much that will cost, and then they agree to it and we sign a contract. And what we're going to provide them is a final report and data and results. Now with a grant from a federal sponsor, you do have to do that as well. But the difference is that a grant is financial assistance, a contract is more in terms of procurement. Award notifications may go to the PI, the investigator, or it may go through the pre-awards office. It just depends on the sponsor. So if we get notice of funding through the pre-awards office, usually the PI is going to be copied on that. It'll come from the program officer in the federal agency's office saying your project has been selected for funding. And then what will follow up from that is the official notice of award, which is the official document from the federal government saying, we're going to provide you funds for this specific project. For other nonprofit sponsors or industry sponsors, they may just email you and say, hey, we want to fund your project. And once you get that email, forward it to your grant specialist, and that'll get the process started for getting your account set up. The first thing that we do after we receive the notice of award is negotiate a research agreement. Now with our federal sponsors, they have standard terms that we don't really have a lot of say in. And so we agree to them, and there's really not negotiation with most of our federal sponsors. Now with an industry sponsor or a nonprofit sponsor, they may send us their version of a research agreement. And so we do need to go through those terms carefully and make sure that we can agree to them. Because K-State is an agency of the state of Kansas, the state has sovereignty over us. And so we have to make sure that those terms are terms that we can agree to. Now that's nothing that you all have to worry about. We have contract negotiators in the pre-award office, and that's their job. They look through those contracts and they negotiate them. Once everything is decided, both K-State and the sponsor will sign it. It's very unusual for investigators to sign. It's usually Paul Lowe and then the sponsor. So once your contract has been awarded or your grant has been awarded, we start the process of getting a grant account set up. Now, it does need to go through compliance first. So if you're using live animals, the ICOOC has to be approved before an account can be set up and funds can be spent. Or biohazards, your IBC has to be approved before anything can get going. Once that's all done, then it moves on to actually have an account set up in our accounting system. And an account number will be assigned where that's where you will charge costs of the project. Okay, so we've got your award set up, and now you need to do the project and manage the award. Your responsibilities, RPI, are to execute the project as outlined in the proposal. And remember what I said earlier, that when you are certifying for proposals or awards in Cayuse, you're agreeing to do that project and abide by K-State policy. That also means any purchasing policies. And every college has a business office and a grant accountant who will help make sure that you follow those policies. We have to make sure that expenses charged to the project are allowable, that they're allocable, we can assign them to a category, and that they're reasonable. You are also responsible to monitor your budget category balances, and there's different ways that we help you do that. And then you are also responsible for your technical progress reports. Now, when you receive a notice of award, there is usually included a schedule of, you have progress reports due on these dates so that you can continue to report progress on the project to the sponsor as you go along. So our responsibility as a grant specialist is that we are going to assist you, or a grant accountant, depending on the structure of your college. We are going to assist you with monitoring the expenses. Every month I send my faculty a statement of account for each of their grants. And so that is my part, is to prepare that monthly statement. I send it to them, and then their part is to look at those expenses, make sure that everything that has been charged to the grant for that month belongs to that grant, especially for faculty who have multiple grants, and then to make sure that there's anything that shouldn't be there. We do also assist with the financial reporting. So while investigators prepare a technical report and submit those to the sponsor also requires financial reports. And so that's something that we prepare, and that we work closely with SPA to get those prepared and submitted to the sponsor. So that's not necessarily something that you'll need to worry about. And then I can assist with the submission of progress reports. I have had faculty that ask me to read through them, make sure there's nothing grammatically scary in there. But it does come down to the PI. That is the PI's responsibility to prepare those technical progress reports. A project that is funded rarely goes exactly as you plan it. And so we do have some wiggle room, and we are able to modify most awards. The biggest thing about award modifications is that depending on the sponsor and depending on the change, you may have to get sponsor approval, and it just depends. And so I always tell my faculty, if anything about the award needs to change, talk with your grant specialist first and figure out, is that something that I need sponsor permission or not? One of the most common modifications that we make to an award is a time extension. And so in that case, you're going back to the sponsor, you just need more time. You don't need more funds, you just need more time. But it's important that you do that prior to the project ending. Another change that we often make is a budget revision. So if you are purchasing things and going through your project and executing it as planned, but the supplies cost a lot more than you thought, we can move money around in the budget categories, but depending on how much we move around, we may have to go back to the sponsor and ask them for permission to, we just need to revise how the funds are spent. A scope of work revision is if you need to remove an objective or add an objective for whatever reason. That is something that you will likely always need to get sponsor approval for, because they funded the project based on this specific scope of work, based on the project narrative that you wrote. And if that is changing, you do have to have their permission to do that before you change it. A change in personnel, I've had, faculty, co-investigators, and sometimes even lead investigators leave K-State. And so they either have to reassign that grant to someone else, or if it's a co-investigator and the lead is not leaving K-State, but a co is leaving K-State, we have to remove them from the project or maybe just change their role in the project. So these are all modifications that your grant specialist can help you with. But just remember that to change things, you most likely do need to get sponsor permission. Okay, so you've done your project, you finished, and now the award needs to be closed out. So your responsibility as a PI is to write that final progress report. And I can't stress enough the importance of submitting those final progress reports on time. Depending on the sponsor, that we often don't get the final payment of a grant until that final report is submitted. So they don't just provide all the funds up front most of the time. They usually provide part of the funds up front, or in terms of a federal sponsor, we literally bill them as we go. But sometimes they will withhold that last payment until they're getting what they want, which is that final progress report. So it is your responsibility to get that written and done in a timely fashion. The grant specialist responsibility, we work closely with SPA to prepare that final financial report. So it's basically an accounting of here's how the project was spent, here's how much was left, if there's any left, and then the logistical process of closing out the actual grant account in our internal accounting system. All right, so that's basically a rundown of the life cycle of a grant and some important terms that you may need to know. Does anyone have any questions? All right, well, I will pass it on to the next presenter.
That's it, right, Sharon? Okay, I am not Mary Lou Marino. I'm Beth Montalone. I direct the Office of Research Development, which was formerly known as the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. And we're over in Fairchild Hall. So we create the funding opportunity bulletin that Amy mentioned. And we also help faculty, postdoc students identify appropriate opportunities and put together larger proposals. We'll certainly consult on smaller ones, but we just don't have enough bandwidth to write proposals for people, but we can give tips. So Mary Lou's going to talk about what it takes to write a winning grant proposal. And obviously, this has got to start with a good idea on your part, whether it's for a small grant. There are some professional societies that have small grants for graduate students, or it might be a fellowship that might support you for a year to a few years. It might be a postdoctoral fellowship that'll be a really nice support for your research and your salary. So there are all kinds of things that you might apply for funds for, but it all comes down to starting out with a good idea. So what is a good idea? Well, it has to be significant. And so what I mean by that is it's not just going to replicate what somebody else did without, significantly making things, providing more knowledge. Sometimes you can take a different system and answer a question that's been addressed in some other system, but you've got to justify how that increases the overall knowledge of whatever you're studying. Innovative is also good, whether you take a new approach or a new method to asking the question at hand. You have to justify why what you want to do is better than alternative ways to do it. You need to be understandable, so there will be more about this in later slides, that you need to use clear language, and I will harp on that. What is the payoff? In other words, why does anybody care if this research project gets done? And some of this is going to be talking about, you're expanding the knowledge, but you may also be expanding the benefits to society if you do this. And your idea needs to be able to be approved by others. So it's not enough that you think it's a good idea. Talk about it to your colleague, your fellow student, your lab mate, whatever. And, let them shoot holes in it. It'll make it a better idea, assuming that they don't, completely kill it on you. Rule 2 is start early. Now, this shows a 9-month timeline for starting to think about an idea and submitting a proposal. I dare say that this is probably wildly optimistic, but it does talk about the kinds of things you need to consider and do before you ever submit a proposal. And obviously, the more comprehensive the proposal, the longer it will take. So just some of the things that you need to do or should be thinking about are in here. But I'm just going to point out the sort of the 3 phases of this timeline. Planning phase, so that's when you're identifying your opportunity, you're shooting around your idea with people, you're thinking about what it's going to take, and then you're going to move into the writing phase where you're going to outline what your proposal might look like, go through your methods, go through your budget, so on and so forth. And then you're actually going to work with somebody in pre-awards to get the thing submitted. Okay, so rule 3, and again, these all sound pretty obvious, but they're pretty important. Organize, okay? Don't just sit down at your computer with a blank screen and think you're gonna write a proposal. That is absolutely the worst way in the world to write a proposal, because you'll have writer's block the minute you try to do it. So have your idea, talk about it, talk it through, jot some ideas down, and then start an outline. Think about what's your problem, why is it significant. Start answering questions like this. Why is your idea better? How is it new or different? What are the outcomes? What are your proposal themes? So working with an outline such as these questions is a better way than starting with that blank screen. Here's some more questions you should be thinking about. What's your overall research goal? You know, for your career, some fellowship proposals, you have to think about this. You know, you're talking about a project, but how does that fit in your overall plans? So you need to have sort of short-term goals that you want to get the funding to do the project, but you will often need to articulate that within the course of a longer timeline. What are your objectives? Those are going to be really important. You need to be able to articulate your objectives. They're going to show up early in a proposal. And if they're not clear, your proposal is doomed. And then you have to start elaborating on how you're going to approach the problem. And this should be organized around your objectives, or aims, they're sometimes called, not have nothing to do with them. Your proposal needs to be unified, and in the organizing principles should be those objectives. And then there's other items that should be in the approach. So what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? What's already been done by others and by yourself? And what are the potential problems you may run into? Say you're doing a project where you have to recruit human subjects. Where are you going to recruit them? Who are you going to recruit? Is there a special population that you're going to recruit? You know, those are all potential problems that you need to have thought through before you start getting into your proposal. Okay, rule 4 is write your problem statement or specific aims. Specific aims is the same as objectives. That's what I said, that those two terms are used interchangeably. And this is going to be that overall concise statement of what you're going to do, what are the objectives, why is it important, and what is going to be the payoff, what's the result. And if you have that, if you have a good statement of those 4 items, that is going to be the groundwork for the rest of your proposal. Rule 5, and Amy addressed this too, get your budget going. Do it early, do it often, because you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to have any idea what to put in your budget the first time you sit down with a blank Excel file. Ask your major professor or your mentor or your colleagues for some ideas about what needs to go in the budget. Obviously, part of your salary or all of your salary might be part of it, but in addition to salary, there's going to be fringe benefits that you're going to have to include. There's going to be supplies to do the research. There may be equipment. If you are requesting equipment as part of your budget, you need to get quotes if it's over a certain amount. If you're going to be working with co-investigators or other institutions, you've got to work out how the money will be distributed among yourselves. And also, I always like to start with a budget because there's almost always a maximum amount that the funder will provide. And I need to think about, is that maximum amount enough to do the project I'm considering? Because if it's not, you're wasting your time. You know, you can't make that money go farther than it will, and you won't have an idea of what you can do realistically with that money until you actually start sitting down and adding up numbers. And if you have a good budget that makes sense, that's well justified, and you go to pre-awards, they will be happy with you because you haven't shown up in their office with a few numbers dashed down on a cocktail napkin, which is the worst way to make a budget. I have literally seen that happen in pre-awards back in the old days. Okay, rule 6, give the reviewers what they want. Okay, so you're going to submit a proposal and somebody is going to review it. And that person may be a program manager. It may be a review panel like peer reviewers. It just depends on what the thing is that you're applying for. And to make sure that you're giving them what they want, the first thing, and this should have been a separate rule, I didn't make these rules up. My first rule would have been read the solicitation. Read it again after you read it the first time. So make sure you know what they want and make sure that what you're proposing is in the scope of what they're asking for. Follow the instructions. Okay, if the instructions say you have only 5 pages, don't turn in 10. It'll get rejected without review. More about that later. They also, in many funding agency announcements, have review criteria that they tell you will be used. Read that section of solicitation and try to organize your proposal around the review criteria. Okay, if it says that they are going to review on the basis of how original your idea is, how practical it is, will it advance knowledge in a particular subfield, you better mention all 3 of those things somewhere in your proposal, preferably near the beginning, and then recapitulate it at the end. Okay, because the reviewers are going to pay attention particularly to those things. If you bury it in the middle, there's less chance that they'll see it. And then finally, be nice to your reviewers. Don't give them a mess to have to slog through. I have reviewed many times and you always get a number of proposals. You generally tend to wait too long to start reviewing them and you're in a hurry. Okay, you don't want your proposal to get, neglected by a reviewer like me because they were in a hurry and they didn't want to work hard to find things in your very dense, very text-heavy proposal. Okay, break it up, use a nice looking font, use diagrams, figures, and so forth within reason. But tell a story and make it a clear story. And don't assume that your readers are all total experts in the field and that you don't need to explain things. That is not necessarily true. They are probably experts in something, but maybe not in your exact area. Rule 7 is have a plan. So this is really about asking for help. So have someone to read your proposal for you that has some expertise. And this is not about them just praising you. This is about them giving you actual critical feedback that can help. So check your ego at the door. That's the first rule here. And also make sure that that person has had enough time to do a careful reading of your proposal. Do not give it to them the night before the thing is due and expect a thorough review. You won't get it. I know we all have spell check on our word processing programs these days. That does not prevent people from having misspellings, misuses of words, hyphenizations, or using apostrophes incorrectly. Get somebody to proofread that thing who is going to be really careful. And this is really important if English is not your first language and you're writing in English. Get somebody to help you by doing a careful reading of your proposal. It's better if they're not associated with the project because it'll be fresh to them and they will find errors more easily. It's hard to proofread your own work because you've seen it so many times and your eye will go right over those kinds of mistakes that sometimes your word processor generates for you despite your best efforts. Okay, because when I review, there is nothing that annoys me as much as silly mistakes, typos, misspellings, misuses of words. It just is a lack of attention to detail that is, really not going to look favorably upon you and your proposal. Rule 8, make your abstract shine. Amy talked about the project summary or the abstract. That's that short either paragraph or page description. That's usually the first thing that a reviewer is going to read. Sometimes that's all they'll read. They're not supposed to only read that, but sometimes they will. The program manager probably is only going to read the abstract because they have a whole panel full of 30 or more proposals. They're not going to read them all in detail. And also, if you are so fortunate as to get funded, the abstract is going to get published on the website. So it needs to be really good. It needs to be really accurate. It's going to be available to the public. You might get reporters calling you up and asking questions about it. Make sure it's good. And it's usually the abstract and then the specific aims that I mentioned earlier are the key things. That's where the reviewers are going to think yes or no, even as they start reviewing your proposal. Rule 9 is avoid Porter's pitfalls. And this is in reference to Dr. Porter, who wrote 2 articles that Mary Lou has posted with the materials for the course. So I'll let you read those yourself. He was the vice president for research at, I think, North Carolina State or University of North Carolina. Mary Lou told me, and I don't remember. But avoid them, and what they are, there's a whole list of them. And I've been talking about these kinds of pitfalls. I'm not going to read the list to you, but do be careful of all of those. Rule 10, get on a review panel yourself. Okay, this helps you out a lot. And you might say, well, how do I get on a review panel? Well, you have the graduate student organization, the postdoc organization here. If there are internal award opportunities like for travel awards or other kinds of things, volunteer to serve. Okay, it's not an NIH grant panel, but it is getting you used to thinking critically about other people's work and having that experience in evaluating proposals by others. And then you can start to see what makes something successful and what makes other things not so successful. So it really makes you more aware. And it helped me a lot when I would review for other agencies, because then I really understood the process and what reviewers were looking for. And funding agencies at all levels, both local ones like I talked about here at K-State, your professional societies, and then of course the big funders are always looking for reviewers because there's a lot of proposals out there to review. So here's recapitulating the rules. I won't read them again, but think about those, and if you follow those, you've got a chance of getting a successful proposal. So if you have questions, here's Mary Lou's email address and direct number, and our office is 102 Fairchild. And that's it for me. Who's up next?
Yes. Did you need any of the other documents? No. Okay. It's notices, keep it in over here, and everything's in this folder here. Right? And then, yeah, it is in my so capturing this in. Whatever you want over here, and get it with the store. What is mine?
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm just getting in here in the nick of time. This seems to be the day that everybody has realized they need to get stuff done. So I've had about 4 workshops on writing today. But welcome. My name is Teresa Merrick. I am the Assistant Director of the Writing Center here on campus, and I'm also an instructor in technical and professional writing. Grant writing, proposal writing, all that kind of stuff is our most often cited question, area of concern and stress, and it makes a lot of sense. This is a critical moment in your research path, and for many, this is often the first time that you are pivoting your writing towards a new audience, somebody who is not as familiar with how journal articles look in your field or what terminology you use in your particular area of interest. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how grant writing can be successful using a multitude of strategies that often start with a good plan. So that's what I'm going to start with today. Basically, the overarching goal of good grant writing is kind of achieving this overarching purpose of turning your research idea into a funding opportunity. We all have things we're really interested in that we love to study, and we spend months and years pursuing it. However, we have to kind of make an additional connection that shows the significance of that idea to an outside audience. And so the first step in getting funding is figuring out what that significance is going to be and being able to capture it in writing. And so some things that you think about in these early stages is, how does your research contribute to your particular field of study? But then also you start to kind of look at the ripple effects. How might your ideas impact your community, local, national, global? How might it impact your university or any organization you are affiliated with? And then oftentimes grant writing is about furthering your own career goals. And so being able to establish an actual significance in your career path that links to your idea is really key. Now, once we have significance figured out, we have to then determine how we can achieve the goals set out in these grant proposals. And so objectives have to be measurable. The goals that you want to accomplish by the end of the funding period need to be able to be evaluated, understood by outside audiences. They have to be specific and they have to be measurable. People have to be able to kind of see that they are being achieved throughout that process. And so you formulate goals, but then you think about how they become measurable. So just as an example, what you'll see up there on the slide is a goal, something that can come out of some research. Our after-school program will help children read better. So this is a nice idea. This is something that we can, prove its significance, but we have to turn it into something measurable. How will that happen? And so an objective that is clearly written in a grant could sound something like this. Our after-school remedial education program will assist 50 children in improving their reading scores by 1 grade level, as demonstrated by standardized reading tests administered after participating in the program for 6 months. So you'll see a lot of quantitative values added to this description. You will also see a timeline that's been discussed. So there have to be multiple ways in which reviewers can see that you have a particular path in achieving the objectives that you've laid out in your proposal. Here's another example. Oftentimes we get a lot of questions about how we measure objectives that are either career-based or oftentimes within the humanities when we feel like we don't have as many data numbers, even though I don't think that's true, but that's kind of the idea. I don't have specific metrics I can turn to. In career moments, we can talk about publications. We can talk about the outreach that gets our ideas out there. And so this is a sample borrowed from a colleague of mine that shows how you can demonstrate that publications and putting your ideas out there for others to see is a measurable objective. And in this case, Cameron had identified specific outlets where publication would be likely and possible. Okay, so there are lots of resources available for writing grants and getting your proposals done. So I'm going to rely on a few of them during this conversation. But what I really like about this 9-step kind of development is that it's only capturing the pre-writing stage. that this is often where people kind of forget they need to plan. And adequate planning and pre-writing before we actually get to drafting the proposal can often be half the battle. And so these 9 things are helping you to figure out like what it is you're trying to say. So make sure you give yourself adequate time to really think about what it is you are speaking to in your grant proposal. What need or problem are you trying to address? What types of solutions and outcomes can you envision? How can you think about ways you will work through problems, barriers in your research or access to information? And do you have a plan? Do you have a plan to overcome them? Being able to kind of then project forward and make adjustments where you feel you can anticipate where readers will have questions, reviewers might ask you to go back and think again. Identifying that before you even get started can be really helpful. It helps you just kind of think through all of the parameters. One of the most important parts of pre-writing is collecting information. You're doing recon to try and figure out who is going to be reading my proposal and what do they value. And so I'm sure a lot of you have poured through a lot of the particular grant organization's website, so that's great. What you want to be looking for are keywords that can give you some signals as to what they are looking for. Looking into your particular grant or funding stream and looking at their reviewer criteria really matters. It will give you keywords and kind of ideas that you should be speaking to and planning to address in your proposal. Oftentimes, understanding the genre or the format that they are requesting is important at this stage too. You can't know what you're writing unless you know what particular sections of information they will require you to have and what particular questions they're asking you to respond to. And then most organizations have an overarching aim, mission, goal, some type of thing that they hope all of their funding opportunities speak to. If you can show how your research correlates to that goal as well, you are more likely to be approved. And so just to kind of show you what that could look like, this is pulled from the NEH. You often look for places on the website where they talk about themselves, about us, our mission, our values, things like that. And so you're trying to think about the broad impacts that they want all of their funding opportunities to be able to further. We take a look a little bit more closely inside the website and we look for particular words that might connect to our research. So facilitating research and individual scholarship, providing opportunities for lifelong learning. All of these things can be used to connect to some of the specific things that you could see happening as a result of your funding. Here's another one. This is what I pulled from the NSF. They have a whole video if you want to go take a look at it. Just a quick little kind of 2-minute video that talks about their overarching mission. And so knowing kind of from this outset what they value can be very, very helpful at this stage. Okay. The next part I'm going to focus on is the basic structure of a proposal. So I'm going to cast some broad strokes here that there are going to be, different types of things you're aiming for depending on what type of proposal you're putting together. But most major grants and proposals include this type of content. So some common sections, they're often labeled a little bit differently, but you provide an executive summary, an abstract, or some type of overall project summary description. This is usually quite short. It has to capture everything you just talked about in multiple pages in 1 or 2. And so that's often the writing we save for last. The rest of the document includes things like a statement of need or purpose. This is kind of the bulk of the grant where we talk about what we're looking for and how much we need, what we're going to do with that. We have a more detailed project description that provides elements that relate to our research field. Might include a literature review. It might cite other sources to show how your work is fitting in with work of others. It might provide more details about the topic and the subject matter so that you can demonstrate why it is important. And then there are those other elements that you're going to hear about from others today, your budget, your timeline, any other credentials that can kind of show you're capable. But the bulk of the writing occurs in those first few sections. This is where you're going to spend most of your time drafting and trying to figure out your ideas. So we'll go through them in a little bit more detail. The summary or the abstract, I'm going to use all these terms kind of interchangeably today. This is your snapshot. This is the research proposal in just a couple of pages. It will summarize all the key information. And these are the types of things that your summary should explain and should capture. This is particularly for readers who are on the panel who may not have read the entire document, because they do exist. You might have some who've been tasked to go through all of your paperwork. You might have some that show up on the day and quickly glance through it. They might look for this abstract to give them the key pieces of information quickly. And so you want to make sure you're addressing what problem your research is going to respond to, how your research is going to solve it, so your particular means that you will use to kind of address the issue you've identified. It will identify what parts of the research you are seeking funding for. And then anything else that you feel is important to that organization is also what you're going to include. This is where you can speak for the first time about how your research is fitting for this particular grant, this particular organization. So NSF will need to see a fit with NSF on this summary. Same thing goes with USDA, NEH, anything else you might be applying to. And so, for example, broader impacts, the big phrase we hear all the time. This is where we want to get a clear picture of what those broader impacts are going to be. The bulk and the meat of your proposal is your narrative. This is where you often have a lot more space to break down your ideas and show us again what you're interested in and why. But the overarching goal, again, is to ensure that you're using this information to explain why this project should be funded. And so the information you choose to provide about your topic is all trying to answer that question. The other component you have to consider as well is that you're demonstrating your own capabilities to carry out this project, that you have the expertise, the means, the access, and the people who can help you with that. And so you're often talking about your own ideas, your research goals as a way to demonstrate your own expertise as well. The other things you're going to be focusing on in the narrative are any particular goals and measurable objectives. So we talked about how you need to capture those right away. This is sort of where you would lay these out in more detail. This is where you would include information about your research methods, the procedures you plan to follow, any early on initial kind of research questions or hypotheses you've developed that will formulate the plan for this project. And then how you mean to evaluate yourself and your results and your data. So this is going to kind of take us through your project from questions through to projected results and findings, what you hope to discover, what you hope to seek and solve by the end. This is where you can include citations, demonstrate that your conversation, your topic is fitting into the conversations of your field, or how it also might be fitting into broader questions that we are asking in the entire research community. The content and the formatting requirements of this narrative are going to vary, kind of depending on where you're applying to, or it's going to vary by discipline. And so you really need to kind of look at sample grants or ask people in your field what these types of proposals look like. But typically they are formatted in similar ways to journal articles, in that you divide information visibly, you use headings and subheadings and things like that to try and make your proposal easy to read. I'll get into a few more of those details later. The other thing your narrative is going to do is anticipate questions. Kind of think about what that review panel sitting in the room or chatting with each other might have to say. What are they going to ask about your grant, what you're able to accomplish? And hopefully we actually answer those questions ahead of time. So we're trying to anticipate those readers' needs and include everything we can possibly think of that will kind of capture what those reviewers will want to know. Okay, a little bit more about how readers, so your review panel, are going to be thinking about the writing that you turn in. Because again, this should be helping you in the early planning phases to figure out what you're aiming for. And so review panels include people who are inside your field, or maybe pivoting towards a slightly different discipline. You will also have people who are not affiliated with your field or who have very little experience reading your particular branch of research interests. And so you have to make sure that you can speak to all of those potential audiences. What everyone is looking for in your proposal is that you are demonstrating how you will advance knowledge in your field and how you will benefit society. They will need to be able to identify those broader impacts and even be able to point to particular locations where you address that specifically. The other things they talk about, they want to make sure your research plan is logical, it's organized, and it's easy to understand, that we can clearly see how you're going to start, how you're going to move through your project, and how you're going to finish. Again, those measurable outcomes are important. They're going to look to see how you are going to evaluate your effectiveness at carrying out your research and how you will be evaluating your work throughout the process. They will look for things like creativity as well, to varying degrees. Looking for opportunities for you to demonstrate through your writing how your ideas might be new or not tried before in this particular way. They're often looking to see if you are well qualified. Some of that comes about through the details you provide about your methodology, about the type of research you plan to conduct, but a lot of times this image of being qualified comes about in the writing style, that you demonstrate professionalism, thoroughness, and attention to detail. And so your proposal is presented accurately and contains as few errors as possible. The other things are including, looking at how you plan to analyze your research outcomes, how you intend to kind of put your research out there into the world, how you eventually hope that your research will impact others. And then the overarching thing they will ask is, does this proposal make sense for our organization? Are they adhering to the organization's specific goals and interests? Because we also want to keep in mind that you can have a very well-written proposal, but one for which the panel might say, this is great, but this isn't for us. And so there always has to be that connection to what the organization is looking for. Okay. Some of the typical weaknesses we hear about, some of the things we see when panels send back your proposal, it has been rejected, or they've invited you to resubmit in a later stream. Anything that tends to deal with writing focuses on a lot of these things. The top problem tends to be that you are not clearly identifying and substantiating a significant problem. And it makes sense why this happens. As researchers, we know our field and our topic inside and out, and so these things seem self-evident. But to an outside reader, you're going to put in more effort, time, and writing in explaining these things and explaining them as clearly as you can. The other detail tends to fall towards budget issues, but being able to demonstrate how you're going to use the money for your project activities. And so having a clearly written budget is going to be important. Other types of problems that we see include having an insufficient plan for evaluating the project. It seems like you're wanting to do too much in too little time, or the methods that you're describing do not seem to suit the scope of the problem itself. All of these things can be addressed through writing. There are going to be components inside the content where your evaluators will say, yeah, this doesn't make sense. But many of these things kind of tie back to how clearly we're presenting our information. And I'm going to go back and mention our audience one more time, just because they really are the key to getting a good grant proposal written, is that people in the room going through serving on a panel have several proposals to read, in addition to doing all of their other work as part of their own research careers. You're going to have people who are academics inside your field, people who don't have any knowledge. And so our real goal in writing and making something readable is to make it as easy to skim as possible. We want people to glean as much as they can just by glancing through, rather than needing to read every single sentence and every detail to understand what your project is about. And so we achieve skimmability through a couple of different things. Using headings and subheadings, clear differentiated sections is really helpful. Nobody likes to read really long blocks of text. And so we do our best to break it up and make it manageable for the eyes. We provide definitions for any term-specific or field-specific terminology, things that we can imagine outside readers may not be aware of. That helps to establish a familiarity that will make them much more likely to follow along. We're going to provide topic sentences. So going back to your high school English papers, we have that first sentence of every section, every paragraph is going to do the job of framing the discussion inside that particular piece of writing. And so topic sentences are often the only thing people read when they read a long document. Make them count and make them clear about what your paragraph or section is discussing. I highly encourage you to get used to reading your work to as many people as will listen to you. Try and find friends inside your department, but also ask other people who don't have as much exposure to your work to take a look through your writing. Have them ask you when they have questions. Have them show you when things need more clarification or when they don't make sense. This is one of the best ways to test what your writing will look like to people who don't know your work. You can employ some type of formatting strategies that get your attention. I find that sometimes this can be helpful, but people often overdo it. So if you're going to be kind of fancy with your color, that's great, but I would do it kind of minimally. That it's really about the writing and how it's put together that stands out to experienced panel readers more than anything else. Graphics and visuals are very helpful as long as they're appropriate to explaining your field, your data, your topic. They can also be used to break up that bit of text that you might have that feels a little bit long and hard to get through. And so these types of things, similar to what you might put in a journal article, would be appropriate and helpful in most cases. A couple of last things to keep in mind. Your habits of writing are going to play into this process pretty significantly. We're all guilty of waiting until the last couple of days before a deadline to really kind of push through, and I get that. But at the very least, you should start planning and free writing earlier than you think you're going to need to get this process done. One of my favorite resources is Paul Sylvia. He has a book called How to Write a Lot, which seems pretty relevant to most graduate and postdoctoral researchers, that we just need to learn how to get a lot of it done all the time. And so he talks a lot about how we have to move through a lot of psychological barriers that get us to that point. You know, saying things like, I just don't have the time, I feel like I'm mentally blocked, I don't have the right laptop or the right lighting. He's really encouraging of just kind of getting through that, pushing through those moments where you feel like there's a barrier. And one of the best ways you can do that is to schedule writing time each and every day, even if it's just a paragraph or two, or a little bit of time where you make some notes. That oftentimes that removes the psychological barrier we have towards getting writing done. So some other things you can keep in mind. Once you have a set writing time established and you want to stick to it, give yourself some reasonable goals. I'm going to get through a couple of paragraphs. I'm going to get through a page. Be able to adjust when your workload requires it. Work on the parts you're excited about. Some people really love talking about their budget. That's great. You can start with that. Other times you're focusing on elements of your research that you find really interesting. That's a great way to start. Try not to put things away for a long time and come back to it. That it is important to kind of keep up momentum. And so give yourself some regular time throughout the grant writing process. Don't worry about what it looks like when you first get your writing down. Don't worry about censoring. Don't worry about making it perfect and formatted well and mechanically correct. That's stuff we can fix later. It's more important to get those ideas down first. Share your ideas with as many people as will listen to you. I've said that before. And there are a lot of people here on campus who are here for this. Finding people in your department, having your supervisors or having other colleagues in your department read through things. This is part of our job and we are happy to do it. You will often find people who are willing to share previous grant writing with you as well. So you can take a look at how they've accomplished it. And then as a final reminder, before we take a little break, the Writing Center is a service for you at this point. I know it's often seen as a service provided just for our undergraduates, but our graduate students, our postdoctoral researchers, and even our early career faculty can utilize us for one-on-one sit-down appointments. So keep us in mind, and you can make appointments with us ahead of time online if you wish as well. But all of our consultants are trained in this type of grant writing. So please keep us in mind. Okay. So this is ending kind of part one of the grant writing process, where I basically just talk at you for a little bit, but we're gonna come back after a little break and actually do some writing and talking and workshopping. I tried to save some trees today, And you should have received yesterday the email from Megan with a link to all of the documents you will need for today. And I think some people have printed them out. That's great. We are going to take a look at 2 sample grants coming from the NSF today, and we're going to kind of look at what writing strategies they employ. So when we come back from the break, if you have them pulled up on a laptop or on a phone or printed out, that will get us going. So they're called Sample NSF 1, Sample NSF 2. Okay, so I think we're going to be taking a break now, take about 15 minutes. Okay, we'll see you in 15. Thank you. 25? Okay.